Hello and welcome. I will tell you about your options for conducting a CO2 calculation, which helps you and your company get an overview of your CO2 consumption. On Valifieds ESG platform, we provide a user-friendly CO2 calculator. You can find the CO2 calculator in your overview under CO2 calculations in the main menu. Simply start a CO2 calculation by clicking New Calculation. Here you can choose between Calculate CO2 and External CO2 Calculation. If you already have a CO2 calculation that you would like to integrate on Valifieds platform, then select a fiscal year and enter your scope 1, 2, and 3 values for the company. If you do not already have an external CO2 calculation made, then create a CO2 calculation by clicking Calculate CO2 here. The calculation of your CO2 emissions complies with current standards and includes both your scope 1, 2, and 3 values. Scope 1 and 2 represent the company's direct and indirect emissions, such as CO2. That is, what you emit yourself or purchase, for example, fuel for your own vehicles, electricity, and heating. Scope 3 are emissions in your value chain. If you have not done a CO2 calculation before, we recommend that you start by only filling out Scope 1 and 2. First, you need to select the accounting period for which you want to calculate your company's CO2. And it is therefore also the period for which you need to collect consumption data. Once you have entered your chosen fiscal year, you will access the CO2 calculator. If this is your first time doing a CO2 calculation, as mentioned, we recommend that you start by only doing a Scope 1 and 2 calculation. So start with your own emissions, which you produce or purchase yourself. We say this because it's a good place to start. If you only want to do a Scope 1 and 2 calculation, you need to fill out the following 4 categories: own and similar means of transport, electricity, heating, and process energy, and process emissions. All other categories belong to Scope 3. The calculator is easy and straightforward to use. For example, in the category of own and similar means of transport, where you need to enter the means of transport. Scope 1 fuel type, fuel, quantity, and you also have the option to attach documentation in the form of a receipt, invoice, or other. Remember, if your company vehicles and electric cars are connected, they should be entered under own and similar means of transport, not electricity. This way, we avoid double counting. Once you have entered the data in the categories that fall under Scope 1 and 2, you are ready to press Calculate. On the results page, you will be able to see the company's total market-based and location-based CO2 emissions. The difference between the two methods of calculating CO2 consumption is that with the location-based approach, you do not deduct the electricity purchased with green certificates, whereas with the market-based approach, you subtract the electricity purchased as green power. The difference between market-based and location-based CO2 emissions thus concerns that there is only electricity consumption, which falls under Scope 2. Therefore, under Main Results, you can see that a total Scope 1 is calculated, but 2 separate Scope 2 and a total Scope 3. Under the 2 categories, you can enter your company information, so you can see how much CO2 the company emits in relation to square meters, number of employees, and your revenue. Calculate CO2 emissions per square meter, employee, and revenue. There will still be a smaller part in Scope 3, which is called Derived Scope 3. If you scroll down, you can first see a bar chart showing how the CO2 emissions are distributed among the 3 scopes, for both the market-based and location-based methods. Afterwards, you will encounter an overview of the 5 main categories and can see how your company's CO2 emissions are distributed within the scopes in relation to the specific category. With the CO2 calculation and overview, you will be able to identify where the company is most vulnerable and where, based on the 3 scopes, you have the greatest opportunity to reduce your CO2. When you need to share your results with, for example, customers and stakeholders, you can include them in a sustainability report using Valified's tool, Impact Reports. All that's left to say is, enjoy a little.